Good morning. Welcome to Tuesdays in the Text. My name is Ted Doering. I'm the pastor of Narrative Church in Round Rock, Texas. And every Tuesday morning I sit down and go through the text that will be used for the sermon this week. Now, Easter was a great time together. Had a great time celebrating Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, Easter Sunday with everyone last week for Holy Week. And we're starting a new sermon series this week called Giving to God. We want to talk about how our finances are part of our discipleship process. That what God has given to us is actually a piece of what He's calling us to do in the world. That as we look at the financial gifts we've been given, that God calls us to then invest those things for the work of His kingdom. So we're going to dive into Psalm 50, into Acts 17, and Matthew 22 this morning to take a look at an overarching picture of God's creation and seeing how He's at work. So let's dive in to Psalm 50, verses 8 through 15. The psalmist writes, "Not for your sacrifices do I rebuke you." Okay, so not for sacrifices. Okay, so we see that what he's rebuking is not for the sacrifices. Your burnt offerings are continually before me. So sacrifices, burnt offerings, these are the same things. Now, when we think about, in the Old Testament, the sacrificial system. So you would go to the temple and you would sacrifice on behalf of your sinfulness, on behalf of what the sins you'd committed. And so this is a setup, God showing, hey, this is how this works, this sacrificial system. And it's all pointing to who Jesus is. So let's keep going. "I will not accept a bull from your house or goats from your folds." Now, in this sacrificial system, you sacrifice different animals for different things, right? For different offenses, for depending on the finances you had, that there was always a sacrifice you could bring. But so here he's talking about, well, these sacrifices, they're not a big deal. So let's keep going. "For every beast of the forest is mine, the cattle on 1,000 hills." Now, I love this. I use this phrase a lot when I talk in sermons talking about God as the God of creation. I just love the poetry. The cattle on 1,000 hills. So think about the rancher in West Texas or up in the Panhandle that has acres upon acres upon acres just filled with cattle. What God is saying is, it's all mine. So look, we see the beasts of the forest, the cattle on 1,000 hills. So those flocks, those animals, those all belong to Him. "I know all the birds of the hills, and all that moves in the field are mine." So here, this all comes back to the Creator. It's all mine. I made it. So then he says, "If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world and its fullness are mine. Do I eat the flesh of bulls, or do I drink the blood of goats?" Now, this is a key thing looking at this sacrificial system, because think about it like this. The pagans surrounding them at that time, you sacrifice to the gods for their favor and their sustenance. I probably didn't spell sustenance right. But the idea was, with the pagans, you sacrifice to please the gods for their favor and to feed them. All right, well, what's God saying here? All right, do I eat the flesh of bulls? Do I drink the blood of goats? This is rhetorical, because with God, sacrifice is about who? You. So with the pagans, they are sacrificing because the sacrifice is about the gods. Ooh, and let's make that a lowercase g here. right? So with pagans, the sacrifice is about the gods. But with God, Yahweh, the great I am, it's about you. He's saying, listen, I don't need your sacrifices. You need your sacrifices. So let's keep going here. Offer to God a sacrifice of thanksgiving, and perform your vows to the Most High, and call upon me in the day of trouble, and I will deliver you, and you will glorify me. Right? So here we see the sacrifices that were given at the temple were not about pleasing God. They weren't about sustaining God. He's not eating those sacrifices. In fact, that when they sacrificed these animals, that food was taken for then the priests to use for their food because they weren't being paid. So they were cared for with the meat of these sacrifices. And so here we see this different sacrificial system that God sets up that is all about helping you to say, okay, you've sinned. Okay, how do you take care of that? Well, you bring a sacrifice. And so God's pleasure is not in the sustenance, is not in the act of him giving you favor, but instead it's saying, hey, you come, you bring a sacrifice, you are redeemed through that sacrifice. And what's it all setting up for? The ultimate sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. All right, let's take a look at this story from Acts chapter 17. Now, if you've been in church for a minute, you've probably heard this story. This is Paul at the Areopagus. The Areopagus, Mars Hill in Athens. So he's preaching. So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, Mars Hill in Athens, says, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious." Now he's saying this at the Areopagus for a reason. So the Areopagus was this hill, and on this hill they had all kinds of altars. And all these altars were to all the different gods, right? So they had one to Athena, to Zeus, to every god they could think of, because they wanted to make sure they were okay. And so much so that one of these is to an unknown god. That they're like, we want to make sure that if we get, we're going to get this right. So we're going to make sure that even if we don't know about the God, but we had this altar here for you, the altar for the unknown God. So let's keep going. "For as I passed, I observed the objects of your worship." So he's talking about all these altars spread around the hill. And here we'll see. "I found also an altar with this inscription, 'To the unknown God.'" So Paul sees this and he goes, "Hey, I know what to do here. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you." So he sees it and he goes, "Listen, I'm going to tell you about something. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man." So here he's saying, hey, look at this hill. And from the Areopagus, you could look up and see the Acropolis, which is where, the Parthenon, all those big temples are. So you can see from where they're standing what's happening for these huge temples that have been made. "Nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything." Now, what does this bring us back to? Let's zoom out here. As if he needed anything? Who's the sacrifice for? Right? The pagans in Athens are the same as the pagans in the Old Testament. They're bringing sacrifices to the gods for favor to sustain them. And so he's saying, listen, my God doesn't need us, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. So what Paul's doing is he's getting their vision. He's saying, listen, you've thought that this is all about what you can bring to the gods. And he's like, let me tell you about the God who brings everything to you. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth. So this is, boom, he's creator. "Having determined allotted periods and boundaries for their dwelling place. So he's saying, listen, he even sets up their nations, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. So what he's saying here is this is what we call natural law. That the God of creation, if you seek him, you will find him. That creation points to him. Let's keep going. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us. Okay, now think about this. He will write later, Paul will write in Corinthians and say, I think it's Corinthians, all those who are far off. And how does he keep going? Have been brought near. So Paul looks and says, listen, those who are far off have been brought near. He's looking again up to the Acropolis. You have to go to the gods. You have to walk to them. And he's saying, no. God is bringing you near to him. Let's keep going. In him we live and move and have our being. Even as some of your own poets, so now he's going to quote the poets, say, for we are indeed his offspring. So these two, I'm 90% sure it's this first one too, right? These are Greek poets. And he's quoting them to say, listen, this natural law, this idea, this is who God is. You've heard about it in your poets. Being then God's offering, we ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art of imagination of man. The times of ignorance God overlooked. So when we didn't know, God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. Okay, this is Jesus he's talking about here. And of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. All right, so here we get, he's talking here about Jesus, right? Now, when they heard the resurrection of the dead, some mocked. I mean, right? Wouldn't that be our reaction? Here we are standing in the middle of the hill of gathering, and, this guy starts talking about the resurrection of the dead. Yeah, well, some people aren't going to get that. But others said, we will hear you again about this. Now, I love this moment. Why? Because we know the word goes out. Right? That the Spirit works when the word goes out. So here, people are hearing this. All right. Yeah, we want to hear more. So Paul went from their midst, but some men joined him and believed, among them whom also were Dionysius, the Areopagite, and a woman named Damaris, and others with them. So then this is just like, hey, here are the people who started to follow. Now, to give you a sense of this, I wanted to give you a little visual, right? So here we have, here is the Areopagus, right? So this is ancient Athens here. And then up here we have the Acropolis. So Paul is down here preaching, right? So he's preaching at the Areopagus, right? So from here, you're going to be able to see what's happening. And in fact, this painting by Leo von Klenz, just found this on the internet. Here's a picture of Mars Hill, right? So here's the Areopagus, Mars Hill, here, right? So here they're hanging out and talking, and you can see in this depiction, it would be easy that the Acropolis is in view, right? That when they're standing there on Mars Hill, the Acropolis is just right above them. And so here you have, the Parthenon and the temples, giant statue of Athena. So you've got these different things that as they look up, they're going to be able to see. And he's talking about this God who's greater than the gods of gold and silver and stone. So Paul's preaching this, saying, listen, this is the God who creates everything. So then now let's see here. Jesus talking to his disciples and the Pharisees show back up in Matthew 22. Then the Pharisees went and plotted how to entangle him in his words. And they sent their disciples, so these are the disciples of the Pharisees, they sent their disciples to him, along with the Herodians. So these are King Herod's guys, who also was not a fan of Jesus, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are true and teach the way of God truthfully. Oh, we're gonna butter you up before we try and catch you in this lie, catch you off guard. And you do not care about anyone's opinion." I love that. Jesus don't play. He knows what he's here to do. For you are not swayed by appearance. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? So you got to remember, the way the Roman Empire works is that when they invade and take over a territory, you pay for your own occupying force. So Rome taxes you, and that pays for their legions to basically lord over you. So the tax to Caesar is a big, big deal. But Jesus, aware of their malice, says, "Why do you put me to the test, you hypocrites?" All right, you actors, you fakers, right? So here we go. He knows, right? So he knows right from here. He knows, hey, I know you're buttering me up. Show me the coin for the tax. I love that. Now this is interesting because you would have had Roman money, and you also would have had temple money. So Jesus is using a physical object lesson to help them see. And they brought him a denarius. So a denarius would have been a Roman coin. And Jesus said to them, "Whose likeness and inscription is this?" And they said, "Caesar's." Then he said to them, "Therefore render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And when they heard it, they marveled. Right? So they're blown away. And they left him and went away. Now, what he's saying here, he knows that if he starts telling his disciples, "Oh yeah, you don't have to pay the Roman tax," Rome's going to be real upset. But he's also trying to help people see his point is not to come here and overthrow a kingdom, to take over. His point is to come and bring the kingdom of God. So he's saying, stop seeing this in this way, but instead, why are you so worried? Yes, you have to pay Rome. That's what you do. But you need to give to God what is God's. And so what we're doing this week in this sermon series as we start off, we're talking about giving to God and saying, if he creates and he builds everything, if all the cattle on 1,000 hills are his, if the people at the Areopagus that Paul points them up and says, listen, those are the gods of stone and gold and silver, but let me tell you about the true God, and he wants to give to you. So what does it mean that we have a God who truly gives and takes care of us? And what does that mean for what he's calling us to do with then what he has given to us? I'm excited to spend time in this sermon series over the next couple of weeks. If you don't have a church home, you don't live here, if you don't have a church home, but you live here around Round Rock, Georgetown area, we'd love to have you with us. We worship at the Texas District Mission Center in Round Rock, Texas, in their chapel space on Sundays. If you don't live around here, but you're looking for a church home, you can always email me, ted@narrative.church. I'd love to share with you and help you find a church for a place for you to connect and be in community. Have a great week. We'll see you on Sunday.